changing an agency's toxic culture requires that the top agency officials set the tone for the entire agency. To help set that tone and to assure FEMA's workforce of your commitment to changing the culture, I want to get your answers to a few questions. First, have you ever been accused of or disciplined for sexually harassing your colleagues in any previous positions?
No, ma'am.
Have you ever been accused of or disciplined for any inappropriate behavior with a colleague?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. In your opinion, have you adopted a zero-tolerance policy for sexual harassment in the workplace in all of your previous positions?
Yes, ma'am.
Finally, will you commit to taking swift action against any future instances of sexual harassment perpetrated by employees of FEMA?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. See if that's better. To Mr. Wolf, first of all, I appreciated visiting with you as I did with Mr. Byard. Over the years, the Department of Homeland Security has struggled to identify its appropriate role in preventing homegrown terrorism. I want to follow up a little bit on some of the issues that Senator Peters was talking to you about. First, the department created a coordinator for countering violent extremism. Then it established an Office of Community Partnerships. In the Trump administration, the new Office of Terrorism Prevention Partnership was created as a replacement for the Community Partnerships Office. These offices have all suffered from a lack of funding, lack of personnel, and lack of internal support. In April, Acting Secretary McAleenan announced the creation of a new office, the DHS Office for Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention, which will be housed in your directorate. The Acting Secretary's comments indicate that this new office is a top priority for the department, which I would welcome and strongly support, as we talked about yesterday. However, the public information provided by DHS uses the same buzzwords and descriptors as the office's predecessors, and from what I can tell, the office's functions are nearly identical to the past versions. Moreover, DHS Assistant Secretary Elizabeth Newman seemingly confirmed this when she testified before the House last week that the current office is a rebranding of previous versions of the DHS's homegrown terrorism prevention efforts. I'm concerned that the department spends a lot of time rebranding old initiatives instead of working to get better results. And I fear that this focus on rebranding reflects a failure of the department, a failure to learn critical lessons about underfunding and understaffing, that underfunding and understaffing undermine our homegrown terrorism prevention efforts. So to prove that the department is serious about this effort, it would be helpful to know the following. First, how much new funding has the department given this office?
Senator, the funding level for the Office of Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention has remained pretty much the same. So we have a base funding, and then we have a $10 million, as I believe we talked about, $10 million grant program that concludes in July of this year.
But that's still no new funding.
That's correct. That funding was allocated in 16, and then it's been a 2-year cycle starting in 17 and ending in 2019.
And how many new staff have been assigned to this office?
From my recollection, again, as you indicated, that office has transferred just recently into the policy office. There are 12 federal employees dedicated. I believe we have 7 to 8 of them on board, but there are additional billets in that office.
So will that be staff in addition to what the staff levels have been? Or
so that's a slight increase over 2018, but it is just a slight increase.
And does this office have a strategic plan?
It is. We are currently at work on that. So as you mentioned, it's not only a rebranding, it goes beyond that. So yes, we are taking lessons learned of the previous iterations of the office, but as the name indicates, we are also widening the aperture. So we're looking at targeted violence as well as terrorism prevention. When we talk to our state and local partners, they're worried about terrorism, but they're also worried about just general mass shootings, school violence, and the like. So we're looking at the targeted violence. So overall, the prevention framework that we are hard at work on will be in our overall counterterrorism strategy, which, as I indicated, will be out this fall.
So, and you will commit to providing a written copy of the Office of Targeted Violence Strategic Plan to include its staffing model, policy, objectives, and the metrics by which it will evaluate its effectiveness by the end of, you said this fall?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. The one other thing, I'm going to move to a quick question with Mr. Byard, but I would like to follow up on if the grants are expiring this July, what your plans are, not only to deal with ISIS and al-Qaeda-inspired domestic terrorism, but also white nationalist-inspired domestic terrorism as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Byard, in New Hampshire, we are seeing the impact of extreme weather events firsthand, as I'm sure every one of my colleagues is in their state. A few years ago, New Hampshire experienced devastating flooding as a result of Hurricane Irene. In fact, the U.S. Interagency National Climate Assessment last year reported that the Northeast is seeing the largest uptick in heavy rain events. And our infrastructure is taking a toll as these weather events become more intense and more frequent. In 2018, a FEMA-sponsored report indicated that every dollar spent on federal mitigation grants saves society $6 overall. Mr. Byard, what steps will you take to improve hazard mitigation efforts, and what resources do you need from Congress? And I realize, Mr. Chair, I'm over time, so Mr. Byard, I'll urge you to be brief, and you can always follow up with written answers.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Senator. Mitigation is the cornerstone for emergency management. The more we spend up front, the more we can harden our infrastructure, the better, that infrastructure will be, and the least reliance they'll be on FEMA and our response and recovery. What I will do, one, is thank this committee for the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, which puts more dollars up front, a 6% set aside up front that we're currently moving through the process to implementation on that. So that's going to give us a great amount of funding before a disaster hits. I'm fully committed, if confirmed, to bettering mitigation across the board. One of my goals will be to have the current position that I sit in not needed anymore at some point. Now, that's a lofty goal, which is response and recovery, but I believe the FEMA administrator in any capacity should be looking at that as he or she moves forward. So I am fully committed to mitigation.
All right, thank you very
Yes,
much.
ma'am.
And thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Senator Scott.